With that in mind, let's go on to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. I want to show you a couple of examples of a Visio diagram embedded in a Power BI report. And these examples happen to be ones that were created by Microsoft. There's a URL up at the top there, aka.ms/Visio PBI. And you'll see there are actually 7 or 8 examples, separate examples at that URL. Here's one, for example, that is a flow chart, and we've got some data and that we've collected about the steps in this process, and we're using a couple of bar chart visuals and a Visio diagram, a flow chart, actually a swim lane diagram to be more precisely correct, in order to learn more about how we're doing with this particular process. Here's an example of a floor plan. This happens to be an office building in which we're doing some temperature and other environmental monitoring, and that's what the various visuals and the floor plan are all about. Here's a retail store that has the same sort of idea, a floor plan, a layout of the retail store. We see sales and inventory bar graphs over on the right. And if you go to this URL and play with these examples, you'll see that they're 100% interactive, exactly like the theme park example I'm going to show you a little bit later. All of the slides are available. I have a QR code and a download link for you in just a moment that you can use to download a PDF copy of these slides. All of these URLs, both here throughout the presentation and in my resources section at the end, they're all available to you. So grab a copy of the PDF of the slides, and you'll have all of these things. You don't need to be furiously writing them down as we talk through them. My plan for the next hour is to open with a few thoughts about data and Visio. Not everybody knows that those two words belong in the same sentence. Many people have used Visio for years and years and years and never even knew that you could have data in a Visio diagram. Well, if you're in that category, I'm going to disabuse you of that notion very quickly here. That's where we'll start. I'm going to show you 2 client case studies. The first challenge was one that involved this particular client trying to help their network technicians in particular, but equipment technicians in general, to get to find and fix a piece of equipment that was failing somewhere in a theme park, and in order to resolve the issue more quickly. More about that coming up. The second case study, the challenge for the same client, was how can we help the people who manage the resort hotels in our theme parks to have data at their fingertips, literally in their hands on a Surface Pro, in order to be able to manage the facility more effectively. After having opened with some thoughts about data and data and Visio, I'm going to close with a little bit more detail about the data behind the second challenge, the second case study. We'll talk a little bit about Snowflake and some other things in that particular part of the presentation. And then I've just got a few slides at the end that have some links to Visio-related resources, Visio and Power BI resources, and some information about some of what I've done in the past that you might have an interest in looking at, LinkedIn Learning courses, for example. Quick bit of background. So my experience with Visio began as part of the Harvard Computing Group. We were a handful of people originally, grew a bit more, and we've sort of dwindled down so that just me and a friend at this point. But we're Harvard Computing Group is a 25-year-old consulting company with a primary focus on business processes and helping organizations to define their current processes. May not come as a surprise to you, or it may, but many organizations don't really know how they get work done. They know it happens, but they really have trouble defining how it happens. So sometimes our challenge with a client is to help them document their existing processes, and typically in the form of a process map, or very often it's the next stage. It's okay, this is how we're doing work now. We recognize that there are some inefficiencies, some things we could improve. How can we make that happen? So we help design future state processes. Well, it was in the process of doing that we decided ultimately that there wasn't a really good way for our clients to create data-rich, content-rich process maps. So we decided to invent something, and Mike, my partner at the time, and a woman who worked with us, Kathy, at the time, the three of us sat down and we designed a Visio add-in called Task Map. So most of what I learned about Visio came from being the sort of lead architect designer for this Task Map add-in. One day in 2008, somebody at Microsoft noticed that I was answering questions online and in fair quantity and said, "Hey, you're now an MVP." And I honestly, at the time in 2008, I'd never heard of the MVP program. It has, in the years since, become one of the most significant parts of my professional life because when I tell you quantities, you'll understand this. There are 6 of us in the world who are Visio MVPs. So it's a small, very tightly knit group. Most of us have been MVPs. In fact, I think I'm the youngest, and it's been 16 years now for me. Everybody else is in the 16 to 22, 23 year range. So we are a small, tight knit group. And in addition to being able to network and ask questions of each other, which we do on a daily basis, the same distribution list also includes the product team at Microsoft. So as Mark knows, the MVP community is a special place in a lot of ways, but when you're part of this smaller group, it has some extra benefits. I have a number of courses available, 5 of them about Visio, one of them about creating flowcharts and process maps. Those are available on LinkedIn Learning. I'll give you a link to that at the end, and I'll repeat the one that's here. And then I've also written a few books about Visio, and there's another one that I'm about to get started on. So that's me in a perhaps not a nutshell. Maybe that was a big nutshell, but that's me. Let's talk about the poll a moment. Let me go over to the screen on which we will see the answers to those poll questions. So it looks like 14 of you have responded, and just under half say yes, they have used data in a Visio diagram. Just slightly more than half say no, they have not. I have to tell you, that's actually a fairly remarkable result. When I do this, the yes percentage is typically 15 or 20, and the no percentage is the balance. So a lot of people, as I hinted a few minutes ago, a lot of people have used Visio, sometimes for many years, and don't know that you can indeed have Visio incorporate data into a Visio diagram. Why would you want to do that? That's a definite question we're going to answer tonight. Second question I asked was, how many of you are aware of the Visio visual for Power BI? And I got to say, Mark, you have a stunning audience here. I've never had more than half say yes. So you guys win a prize of some kind for more of you being aware that this is even possible. And the second case study we're gonna do tonight is all about. Oh, you're just gonna pad the answer here. Somebody else just said yes too. Great. I'm really pleased to know that there are that many of you who are aware of this thing. By the end of the evening, you'll see some very specific examples. So that's the end of the poll. Let's talk about a couple of mechanical things related to Visio and data. The primary reason that people who don't know that you can have data in a Visio diagram is because there's a special window, curiously called the shape data window, in which you interact with the data that can be in a diagram. And that window is off by default. So no matter every time you launch Visio, unless you've actively turned it on at some point in the recent past, that window is closed. So without that window being open, how would you know that a shape can indeed contain data? The question you may be wondering is, how do I turn this window on? How do I open this window? And the answer is here on the screen. Just right-click on any shape in Visio, select data and then shape data, and this window or a window like this will open. Now, normally this window floats over the drawing page and you can move it around anywhere you want, so it's out of the way. But if you are like me, what I tend to do is grab the header and dock it over on the right side of the drawing window. That way all my stencils are over on the left where they normally live in the shapes window, and my shape data window is docked over on the right. Since 95% of what I do in Visio involves shape data, it just makes sense to have that window docked there. But you can let it float. You can dock it on any of the 4 edges of Visio if you want to. Many shapes, and I'll talk more about this in just a second, contain predefined data fields like these 7 that you see here. Not the data values you see here, but these 7 fields that you see here are part of every flowchart or swim lane diagram that you've ever seen or created in Visio. Again, if you hadn't known the window was there, you wouldn't have known that the data fields were there, but these 7 fields are part of every flowchart shape. You can define your own data fields. This is a topic for another presentation another time, but it is possible to create data fields. You can type them to a reasonable degree, so you can create fields that are designed to hold numeric data or text data or currency data, time or duration fields, date fields, lists, drop-down lists. So a user who's interacting with your Visio diagram can select a value from a drop-down list. So that's all possible in Visio, and I'm just going to leave that with you for the most part. Where do you find predefined data fields in Visio? These are just a sampling, 8 or 9 or 10 templates that some of which you may have worked with, some not, but these are templates whose shapes do indeed already contain predefined data fields, and there are many more than this. So does that make sense? For those of you who were in the no, I wasn't aware, do you get an idea now of there's something to look for, something to go to, right-click a shape, choose data, shape data, and explore that shape data window that pops up. Mark, it occurs to me that I suddenly realized I can't see the chat. I did see a thumbs up from somebody, so thank you. So without the chat visible at the moment, if you don't mind just keeping an eye on it, as you said.
I will definitely monitor it. Yep.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. So beyond just putting data into shapes, what do you do with it? Well, there are reports you can run. But you can also visualize data right in a Visio diagram. This just happens to be 3 examples here. You see a flow chart in the upper right that has some measures, and that legend tells me what the flags mean, what the red liquid or liquid in the thermometer means, what the shape colors mean. That legend, by the way, and the others that you see here, those were generated automatically by Visio. In Visio Professional and Visio Plan 2 on the Data tab, which is where most of the interesting things related to data live, there's a button that says Insert Legend. And so I create visualizations, I click a button, and I have a legend that explains what those visualizations mean to anyone who looks at my diagram. The bottom one is a simple diagram of a local area network. We've got some servers of different kinds, CPUs, and we're measuring a couple of things there. CPU status, up, down, or in trouble. Or unknown, I guess I called it, and the speed of the CPUs. Over on the left, we have an organization chart. Now, you've all seen organization charts. What if you could link your organization chart to your HR database and visualize data from about employee performance, for example, right there in the organization chart? And that's exactly what this example is all about. So it's not just about, oh, that's interesting, I can put data in shapes. What's really useful and interesting to me is what can I do with it once I have that data there? And visualizing it right in a Visio diagram is indeed our first case study. So I kind of cheated a little bit. This first case study does not involve Power BI, just Visio, but I wanted to include it because I wanted to give you an idea of on one hand, fairly simple, but on the other hand, very effective way to have shapes in a Visio diagram change color based on underlying data values. So the situation for this first challenge with this particular client was the underlying question for them was, it takes our technicians a long time when they go out into a theme park to find the piece of equipment that is broken or needs to be replaced. Now, you might say, well, gee, it's probably in a closet somewhere, right? Well, yeah, it's in a closet somewhere, but the one theme park whose map I'm going to show you happens to have 337 buildings in it. And the average tech doesn't necessarily know any of those buildings, because even if that tech has been in the park as a guest, you only see a subset of all the buildings in the park as a guest, right? There's the whole backstage behind the scenes area where there are hundreds of buildings that tech may not have been to before. This particular theme park operator happens to employ a lot of contractors for field service positions like this. So it's not a given that the contractor who gets assigned a particular ticket to fix or replace something has ever even been in that theme park. Specifically, I interviewed one such tech, works for a contractor, and he told me that whenever he goes to the particular park whose map we're going to see in a moment, he plans to spend between 1 and 2 hours wandering around trying to find the right building, let alone finding the equipment inside the building. That's another whole challenge. As we joked about with him, you have to be careful which doors you open and which ones you don't. There are certain doors you don't want to open that door unless you're in costume, right? Because you may end up on stage if you're not careful. So there's navigation inside the building. That was a separate problem. We were trying to enable these technicians to get to the right building in a reasonable amount of time without having to spend an hour wandering around. So how do we go about meeting this particular challenge? Well, for those of you who are data folks, which is pretty much all of you in the audience, what's the first thing, if you're presented with a new visualization, a new business intelligence challenge, what's the first thing you want to do? Anybody come off mute, or Mark, if anybody posts in the chat, let me know.
I'm watching. I don't see any responses yet.
You have to listen to them and see what they think the problem is. Because
okay, I love that. Thank you.
That's probably the problem.
Yeah, there may be a problem that they are saying, but isn't the real problem, or they may not even know what the real problem is yet. I love that.
And Doug in chat is saying, start by collecting data.
That was actually the answer I was looking for. I phrased it slightly differently here. I said, there we go. Analyze available data and collect more in all likelihood. So yeah, as true data geeks, one of the things we want to do once we understand what the problem is, and I really do love that other answer. I think I'm going to have to add a bullet here. Determine what the real problem is, collect information in general, but we want to collect and analyze what data we have available to see what we can use and what else we might still need to go find. So thank you for that. In my particular case, what I needed to do then, once I understood what data we had, I needed to build some base maps. Now, you might say, it's a theme park. There already are maps. Well, there are maps, but when you think about it, when you go to a theme park as a guest, what do you get? You get a very stylized map. It makes it really easy to find bathrooms, hopefully, but it definitely makes it easy to find gift shops and snack bars and all the restaurants and all the places where you can spend money. And certainly it makes it easy to find the attractions. But as I commented a moment ago, that doesn't help a bit for the dozens or 100 or more buildings that are behind the scenes, that are not guest-facing buildings. So I needed maps or aerial photos, or as you'll see in a moment, a combination of the two that would allow me to build a base map that would serve this particular purpose. And that purpose was to not just have a decent map that someone could use to get from place to place, but to have every building be individually addressable so that we could connect each building to data. So hold that thought. We'll come back to that again in a moment. What I ended up needing to do, or deciding to do, was to find the right combination of aerial photos and maps and put them on a Visio background page. Don't know how many of you have used background pages in Visio, but you have two types of pages in a Visio diagram. Foreground pages, those are the ones on which you typically are dragging, dropping shapes and creating your diagram, and then a background page. A very conventional use for Visio background pages is putting the logo, in your company logo, in the upper left-hand corner, or putting a legal notice or disclaimer of some kind in the bottom, or putting a legend or something that needs to appear on multiple pages. You can assign the same background page to one or multiple foreground pages, and actually, even background pages can have their own background pages, which allows you to do some pretty creative things. In my case, the purpose of a background page was this. Anybody remember tracing paper? Sort of onion skin style paper, very thin like the skin of an onion. that you used to put on top of a diagram or drawing or something that you wanted to trace. And you ended up, I see a couple of yeps. Yeah, people, there are probably isn't anybody here as old as me, but on the other hand, there are a few of us who are old enough to remember tracing paper as kids. That's really what all I was doing was using the Visio combination of foreground and background page to use the foreground page like tracing paper. So I copied from the background page all those elements that I needed. I needed to, there are ponds and roads and trails and railroad tracks and theme park rides. And then I needed to draw buildings. This was very time consuming, as you can imagine, because we needed a degree of detail here that was unlike any other maps that they had available. So that's why we were creating something here from scratch. But it was getting to the building level that was the important part, as I mentioned, because we needed each building to be addressable and so that we could link it to data. Oh, good comment from Mark G. Background page is kind of like a slide master in PowerPoint. Similar idea. You can put things on a slide master in PowerPoint that that will then appear on any slides based on that master. And by the way, Mark, as you can probably tell, I just noticed that I reconfigured my screen a little bit here, so I do see the chat more readily now. So I was doing all those things, and then there came this moment when I took the background page away to say, did I get everything? And I ended up reattaching the background page a couple of times, because when you have all that stuff going on as you're drawing or tracing or whatever, you sometimes realize, oh, I missed this over here, missed that. But then I got to a point where I was pretty much finished with the background page and disconnected it from the foreground page. And oh, by the way, along the way, I wrote a little bit of Visual Basic for applications. Some of you have probably written a fair amount of VBA code or dabbled with it a little bit. I wrote some VBA code because there were certain things that I wanted to automate, certain functions that were just repetitious. For example, numbering buildings or applying numbers to buildings. I needed to do that, and doing that manually was a real drag. If I discovered a new building, and you may think, well, how would you discover a new building? Well, not all the maps I had were up to date. So there was a bit of discovery going on here. I didn't want to have to manually renumber everything. There were some other functions that I used some automation via VBA for as well. So what was I working with? I had things like, this is actually a copy of a PDF map that they gave me. It said, here's this map of this theme park. It's about 5 years old. Much of it is still current, but not all. And that led me to Bing and Google Photos, because this is an actual aerial photo of this park. And what I ended up creating was kind of a mosaic. There were sections like this, for example, this part right here, where there used to be a completely different attraction in this sort of west central corner of this particular theme park. And it went away. Some of the bits of it went to other places in this park. Some of it was eliminated altogether. And a whole new attraction area was built in this section of the park. So that's why I needed this sort of mosaic. So my Visio background page ended up looking like this, with bits of photo, bits of PDF map, and whatever else I needed to ensure that the maps that I was going to create were as accurate as possible. Ultimately, I got the infrastructure in place. And as I said, yes, this was a bit time consuming, but we had nothing else as a reasonable starting point. So I have roads and trails, this red dashed line. You'll see the legend in a few minutes for what some of these things are. You'll see what looks like might be a set of railroad tracks here, or perhaps a roller coaster. This is actually a railroad set of railroad tracks right here in the top center. So those are all things that I was able to trace from the background. And then it was a matter of adding the buildings. And I will tell you, I came to love rectangular buildings, because in Visio, many of you have used it, there's a rectangle drawing tool and ellipse drawing tools. So nice regular shapes were ideal. You know how many shapes like that, how many buildings like that there are in a typical theme park? Not very many. Many of them were very convoluted designs. And so a lot of what you see here were drawn or traced almost by hand, with as much help from Visio as I could get. But that allowed me then to say, okay, I've got a base map. I've got individually addressable buildings. Now I use some of that VBA code to number the buildings in an appropriate way. I was able to link to the data source that listed all the equipment that was in each building, and then create visualizations. Now, we used a simple approach here, and that was what Visio refers to as color by value. You'll find that in some other visuals in Power BI as well. But we just wanted the buildings to be color coded based on the data, the kinds of equipment they contained. And then, of course, we wanted to add a legend because we ended up with multiple colors, and we needed to be careful that everybody understood what each color meant. So I ended up with a map like this, and rather than look at an image of the map, let's actually go to the map itself. Just checking the chat here. Don't see any other questions there yet. If you do have any, let me know. Let's go here. So this is a Visio diagram that is stored in OneDrive. Now, the reason that's important is 7, 8 years ago, something like that, somewhere 6 or 8 years ago, Microsoft made one of the biggest and best feature additions to Visio that's come along in quite a long time, and that is that any Visio diagram stored in either SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business is viewable in any browser on any device. I'm going to say that again, any browser, any device. Now, I referred obliquely to my age earlier. Some of you may be old enough to remember the days when Microsoft used to say, yeah, it works in any browser, just so that browser is Internet Explorer, right? So I was skeptical when they said this. Any Visio diagram can be viewed in any browser and any device. I said, yeah, sure, I'll believe that one of these days. Lo and behold, it's absolutely true. The fidelity is exactly the same. Looking at a diagram on an iPhone, this happens to be Chrome on my PC, could be Safari on a Mac. It truly is magical for anybody who's struggled with how to share Visio diagrams. And oh, by the way, you don't even need a Visio license to view those diagrams. All you as the diagram creator need to do is provide a URL with appropriate permissions to that that OneDrive or SharePoint location, and anyone with a browser can view your diagram. There is also a commenting capability that's available whether someone has a license or not. So there's a nice collaboration capability here such that anyone using Visio itself on the desktop, a browser-based version of Visio, or just viewing a diagram in a browser without even having a Visio license, all of them can comment on the diagram. And so you can build threaded comment strings about, what's this building, what's this step in this process, who's this person in the organization chart, I never heard of them. Whatever the comments are that are appropriate to a particular diagram, all that comes for free with Visio these days. And again, it works in a browser on any device. So with that as the background, that's exactly what this is. This is a Visio diagram stored in OneDrive, and all we did was provide the technicians with a URL so that whether they were carrying their iPads or iPhones or a Surface Pro or any other device, they all had the same view of the map. In this particular park, we've got lots of parking spaces down here. The entrance to the park is right here. These 3 little gate buildings here. We've got attractions, we've got restaurants, all the usual stuff. Walking paths are the dashed green lines. Let me zoom in a little bit more here. So walking paths are the dashed green lines. The dashed dot black line are roads. So those are the roads leading to parking areas and a road around the park itself. Now you can see this roller coaster, this particular railroad, a log flume sort of ride here. This is basically the theme park diagrammed in Visio, and buildings are different colors. Now let me come up to the top of the diagram here and come back out a bit. So here at the top of the diagram, we've got buildings that are different colors. Now, the reason there's so much color in this corner of the map is because it's artificial. I put this in as demo data to be able to make this and the next couple of points here. And that is, we wanted to be able to see what kind of equipment was in each building, as I mentioned before. So we have a set of colors. Now, a quick note about these colors. These are not completely arbitrary colors. I wanted to make sure this map was ADA compliant, or at least was available to people who had the leading causes of types of color blindness. So I used a site, a page actually at Adobe that is designed specifically to let you create a palette that is viewable by anyone who is not colorblind, but also is the colors are distinguishable by people who have any one of the three primary types of color blindness. It's a marvelous site. I've got a link to that page at the end in my resources section. I ended up using it in a little bit more complex way, because you notice we have different kinds of equipment here. We took to calling this the Senate because we've got security, entertainment, network attractions, and so forth for Senate. We needed a unique color for each of the members of the Senate, if you will. There's a color here for any building that has multiple types of equipment, and then a color for a building that has no equipment. So you see gray buildings. You also see buildings that represent most of those colors. And we also had some special colors for other purposes. But the Adobe Color Picker only gives you a palette of five colors. So I needed 10. So I ended up having to play around a little bit to create 2 sets of 5 that were distinguishable from each other across all 10. And that took some time, but highly worth it. And I strongly recommend that. Many of you probably do that in Power BI or other visualizations you create already. So this is a page that has all of the colors turned on, if you will, because this is the general map of the park, and we have the legend and the colors in the buildings. What if you're a network technician or a telecom technician? You don't want to be worrying about buildings that have stuff you don't care about. So down across the bottom, you see a number of tabs, one for each member of the Senate, if you will, security, entertainment, network, and so forth. Each of these pages is the identical map that only shows the color for that particular type of equipment. So I'm on the network page. We either see buildings that are green or they're gray because they have no network equipment in them. If I look at the telecom page, for example, or the engineering services page, exactly the same idea. So we not zoomed in here, but let's do that. Exactly the same idea here for orange buildings that are engineering services. Now, just as an example, before I leave Visio behind here for this case, as an example of the smartness of Visio shapes, there is no code involved here that drives these color changes when we're filtering for one type of data or another, one type of equipment or another. Each shape has in it a formula that basically says, what is the name of the page I'm sitting on? If it is the name, if I have equipment that matches the name of that page, then turn me a color. If I don't, then make me gray. So that's all built in. That's part of the smart shapes, just some formulas built inside each of these building shapes. All right, so that's the idea with this first case. And as I mentioned, this is all Visio all the time. There's no Power BI yet. We're getting to that right away. But before I move on, let me just ask whether that makes sense. Does it generate any questions, any use cases you can think of? This happens to be a theme park. I don't know about you, but I don't manage theme parks for a living. But I do manage a lot of other things, business processes, organization charts. There are lots of things in which I can use these sort of ideas. So anybody have an idea that occurs to them that might be a good use for this?
I have a question. Did they inquire with you about using this for business purposes, where areas of the park are, generating different revenue, and if people eat peanuts in one part, pretzels in the other?
We didn't have that conversation only because, like a lot of organizations, I was working with the group in IT that supported theme parks and cruise ships, and their focus was on infrastructure maintenance. So that's a different part of the organization than the organization that worries about sales at snack bars. Had this been a longer contract, I would have gone to other parts of the organization and said, "Hey, does this look interesting? What if we could turn your buildings red, blue, or green, depending on pretzel sales or other things that you care about?" So, very good question. Pranam says AC, telephone, or electrical outlet malfunctions within multi-floor buildings. Yeah, sure. If you have a color-coded a floor plan that you can color code to show electric outlets that are working or not working, absolutely. My daughter and her wife just bought a house about 6 months ago, and it's a 245-year-old house. It's had a lot of electrical work done over the decades, over the centuries. And there are 2 circuit breaker panels in the basement that are mysteries. There are about 9 breakers out of 40 that were labeled. So part of my housewarming present to them was to draw detailed Visio floor plans down to and including the electric outlets, which is why I mentioned it. Every electric outlet in every room on both floors of the house and in the basement. And then we had a party one day where we had something, night lights, anything we could plug into an electric outlet. We had a dozen people in the house with walkie-talkies, and my daughter Julie was in the basement. She'd flip a circuit breaker off, and everybody would respond to say what was still on, what turned off when she turned the breaker off. And we've ended up, and so I built a data set, just used Excel because why not? Built a data set of all the circuits in the house and married them to the Visio diagram. I haven't done what Pranam suggests and indicate which ones are live and which ones aren't by automatically color coding them, but absolutely you could do that. Absolutely. Another question, how do we integrate this into Power BI? Yeah, that's absolutely next, very next question. Let's do it. Let's talk about that. So if I have the ability to create Visio diagrams that can have smart shapes in them and can have data values, data fields and data values in them, is there a way that I can use that in conjunction with Power BI in order to bring value to end users? The specific use case for this client was, managing resort hotels. They had a vast database, and I'll talk more about that database in a couple of minutes. They have a vast database that shows all of the interactions with every hotel room in every hotel, every floor of every hotel, in every resort. They currently had a way for housekeeping supervisors and the engineers in the hotels to run PDF reports, and they could do that daily or weekly or however often they wanted. But of course, whenever they did that, that was always it's after the fact. They've got a PDF that might have some, heaven forbid, pie charts or bar charts or whatever. But there was no way to interact with the data. So the goal for this project was, let's put real data in the hands of housekeeping supervisors and the engineers who maintain these buildings. Very similar situation in terms of the starting point. First thing I did was say, okay, tell me about your data. You say you've got lots of it. Tell me more. What is it that's there? What's not there? Some of the questions several of you suggested a few minutes ago. What else do you need besides this large data set? And so forth. So once we established a baseline of the fact that this data set was so detailed that it probably had everything we needed, I just needed to winnow it down and create subsets of the massive data to be useful in this case. Then I had a very similar problem to what I had in the theme park. Now what I needed, instead of maps of the ground, I needed maps of the floors in the hotels. So we needed to get blueprints or other drawings. Now, there are lots and lots and lots of blueprints for every one of these hotels. Most of them are anywhere between 5 and 20 or 30 years or more old. So there's not just one set of blueprints. Unfortunately, there are multiple sets, because there may be the original set. There may be an as-built set of drawings. There may be, in many buildings, there was a set of blueprints for a set of renovations that were done in 1997 or in 2014. So there were multiple sets of diagrams from which to choose. I did exactly the same thing. I played the foreground background game in Visio. So I set up my tracing paper, and I would trace in a little bit more structured way, as you'll see in a moment. I traced what the floors looked like, where the rooms were on the floors, and then it was a matter of creating in Visio, creating room shapes. Now, you've been in hotels or office buildings or any kind of larger building, and you know that there are a fair amount of variation among room types. Now, in a hotel, there are fewer variations than there are in a typical office building in all likelihood, because you don't have conference rooms and large private offices and small private offices and big open spaces. You have room, 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 room. But in a typical hotel corridor, do the doors face into a central corridor? Do they face out to exterior corridors? And we're talking theme parks here and weather-friendly places. So outward-facing doors are perfectly normal. Is it a case where every room has the door to the hallway, say, hinged on the right, or as in many hotels, do they alternate? So we've got a pair of left and right hinged doors and another pair of left and right hinged doors. Is the bathroom in the front of the room on the right or the left, behind the door perhaps, or is the bathroom at the back end of the room? There are lots of variations. So what I ended up doing was building a working set of room types based on all the floor plans that I'd collected, and created what it was effectively a library, or in Visio terms, a stencil full of room shapes that I could then drag onto the page and use. Now, dragging rooms one by one was not my idea of a good time, because we're talking lots of hotels, multiple floors in many of these hotels. So what I ended up doing was recognizing the patterns and leveraging those patterns, so that I said, okay, well, here's a block of rooms that all have this set of properties, and there are 8 rooms in this block. Oh, and here on the other side of this floor is an identical set of 8 rooms in a block. And here's a wing over here that has 10 rooms, and they're rotated 90 degrees, but you know what? They're basically the same rooms. So this was definitely a place where I wrote VBA code. In fact, I spent probably the first 2 or 2.5 months doing nothing but designing rooms and room blocks and writing the code to automate that, because I wanted to be able to go to a new building, put the floor plan on the background page, and then say to my code, give me 3 blocks of rooms that doors face inward, and they run east-west. Or give me a block of 10 rooms that runs north-south and doors facing outward. Well, yeah, you get the idea. So I wrote a bunch of code to be able to do those kinds of things, fill in a form with some numbers, and poof, Visio drops room blocks onto the page for me. What did I have for working material? It was as varied as for the theme park. I had some very simple diagrams like this one that said, okay, we've got 3 floors in this building, and every floor looks like this, except for the 4th floor, by the way. Oh, that's different. But the first 3 floors look like this. These digits are the last 2 digits of the room number, and there's an organized way in which the building and floor number are encoded into the prefix that is in front of these 2 digits. So you have to learn their patterns, understand their data, of course. I also had floor plans like this, or pardon me, blueprints like this. So I was working from very minimal detail or excruciating detail in these 2 examples. But it was still the same idea. I ended up, as I said, creating blocks of rooms so I could, in an automated way, drop the block of rooms for this wing here and these 2 wings on the sides, or a floor that looked like this with some large blocks and some small blocks, or even some individual blocks like this that only had 1 room, not a pair of rooms back to back, or a hotel like this that has rooms at various angles because there are wings that are angled with respect to the main corridor. And then it's a matter of adding the data. Just like every building needed to be addressable in the park map, every room needed to be addressable. Here that was easy because every hotel room already had a number, so it was a matter of just matching those to the numbers in the database. Link to that database, which I'll talk about in just a very quick second. Create the Power BI report, embed this Visio visual that half of you know about into the Power BI report, and we had something that was approaching magical. I did have to deal with the data, though, and let's talk a little bit about that. The one bit of data that I needed to create was to describe the resort structure. We talked to a bunch of people. We couldn't find anybody that had a concise data set that described the hierarchy from a park. So I built this in Excel. I've got a park page, a tab in Excel for the park page. And then for each park, there are multiple resorts. And any one resort can have one or multiple hotels. A hotel has at least one floor. And oh, by the way, some hotels consist of multiple buildings, so we have to accommodate that. Some hotels are one building, some are multiple. Once we've identified the specific buildings, then we have to worry about floors. And of course, on each floor, there are rooms. So it took a little bit of time to get this structured in a useful way, but I was able to automate a lot of the data collection and the data manipulation to build this Excel workbook. So that's data source number one. That was one I created. The one that already existed is my favorite database name, data source name ever. For the first couple of weeks I was there, I heard people talking about hot sauce, and I figured they must be talking about, went to a Mexican restaurant last night or something they put on their eggs for breakfast. I didn't know. It turns out hot sauce is a commercial database offering from a company called Amadeus, a longtime player in the travel industry automation game. And hot sauce stands for the Hotel Service Optimization System. So hot sauce became my friend. I ended up learning a lot about the data in this hot sauce repository. One of the things I learned very early on was I didn't have direct access to hot sauce because Amadeus controls the access very strictly. But at 4 a.m. every day, there was an extract, and I'll talk more about that at the very end. But it was having that data available that allowed me to drop the Visio visual that I've just highlighted in red into a Power BI report, all the usual collection of slicers and dicers, and allow the data and the diagram to interact with each other, as you'll see right now. Any questions as I'm changing pages here and getting to this part of the demo?
There are none posted.
Okay, good.
Have you, did anybody ask you about comparing this approach with, map patterns that are already present in Power BI, like shape maps and stuff? What are the pros and cons?
Yeah,
maybe
we
at
did.
the end, once you get a chance to show your approach.
Yeah. Yes, and let me just answer that question briefly now, and if you have further questions about it, Dan, let me know. We did look for other alternatives, and the most interesting thing I found was a consulting firm in the UK that uses a type of data structure, the acronym for which is escaping me at the moment, widely used in the building industry for encoding polygons that comprise buildings. And so you can build, basically it's a CSV file that has reams and reams of numbers separated by commas that describe the exterior polygon and all the interior polygons in a building. And it had some virtues. It didn't allow us to do the things that we wanted to do, that most of which you're going to see now. So that was the primary thing we looked at. At the time when I looked at this, and by the way, I should make this I should have made this disclaimer earlier. I'll make it now. I'm a Visio guy, have been for a long time. When I started this project, the theme park map, as you might imagine, was the first thing they asked me to do. And then the lead at this theme park IT group said, "Hey, we're starting to use Power BI a lot. Can you put one of those Visio diagrams into Power BI? I hear you can do that." And I was completely honest with them. I said, "Yes, I know you can. I've seen good examples. I have not done it myself." So I've got a learning curve. I'm not a Power BI expert. And he said, fine, one of those rare times when a client said, "Go ahead, learn what you need to. We're interested in seeing the result, however you get there." So I ended up learning a fair amount about Power BI, at least enough to be dangerous in general and specifically about how to incorporate this Visio visual. So that's my quick disclaimer. I strongly suspect there are other visuals I could have found. I didn't find any others besides this one in the UK. There may very well have been others that I could have used. And if you are aware of any as a basis for asking your question, I'd love to know because I'm just a curious guy who would like to know whether that's possible. I will also say one question I didn't get when I talked about the park navigation maps that I'm kind of surprised no one asked is about using GPS. And, why didn't we build GPS equipped maps? And a quick aside about that, for the theme park, they decided they wanted to keep it simple. If we were doing it again, I think I would have pushed harder to incorporate GPS right from the beginning so that and that might have led us away from Visio and to some of the other mapping systems that are available for Earth-based maps. Don't know, but in that particular case, they said, no, we want to keep this simple. We want to make it a Visio diagram people can look at on their phones or their tablets. So excellent question. Thank you. Back to the resorts. So the other requirement, aside from let's put these floor plans into Power BI reports, was how do we make this so simple that a senior executive who doesn't know anything about Power BI can navigate down to and get at the data for a particular hotel. So I said, okay, we can do that. We can make it dead simple just by using some drill through. And in the real example, of course, these two circles would be actual logos of theme parks whose names you would recognize. But I've generified this and all of the data, so with their permission to be able to show this. So let's go to Park 2 and standard Power BI drill through. I dropped this map here and built some hotspots on it so we can, for example, continue to drill through. Let's go to Resort A. Now my backdrop is actually a guest-facing map. So this is an actual map of this resort section of this theme park. And I once again built some polygons and hotspots for drill through so that said executive or anyone who's using this navigation device can say, okay, it's Hotel 1 I want to go to. So let's click on Hotel 1. Now, this page is a little bit more interesting because there are two levels of drill through. If at this point I know that it's the third floor of Hotel 5 that I want to go to, I can select it, click the button here that says go to selected floor, and it will take me directly to that Power BI report page. On the other hand, if I don't know for sure, I just know it's this hotel, I set it up so that the entire background image is a hotspot to a different Power BI report. So all of those pages were in one Power BI report. Now we've navigated to a Power BI report that is specific to this particular hotel. At this point, we're looking at I like to think of this as a visual table of contents. Let's say that I'm a manager of a portion of this resort. I know that this is the hotel I'm interested in. I'm not exactly sure which floor of which building until I get here. And now I can see, oh yeah, there are 5 buildings and most of them have 3 floors or 4 floors. And I get a sense, oh yeah, okay, so it's the second floor of building 2 that I want to go to. As a quick aside, each of these is nothing more than a screenshot of the Visio floor plan page that part of my VBA code, take that screenshot or create an image of the page, shrink it down, rotate it, I don't know, 30 degrees or whatever that is, and then drop it on this page. And then I was able to arrange them manually in a way that as closely as I could, fairly closely resembled the actual physical layout of the buildings on the ground, because we wanted to make it easier for people to see things they recognized. So that's why you might think it odd that we go from building 1 to building 3 to building 2, but that's actually the way they are on the ground. So one more click to get to the second floor in building 2 as an example. And now we're looking at a live version of what you saw a second ago as an image in the PowerPoint presentation. You have the option to include any normal Power BI visuals in addition to the Visio visual. And in this case, it's mostly slicers and dicers. I've got some here that I'll use in just a second. I've got a date range selector, as you can see. And by the way, this is not the standard Microsoft date range selector. I used it for a while. If you have used it, you'll notice that there's some differences over here. I found this one, it's called, I think the company is Paraplan. I know it starts with P-A-R-A. If you search in the Power BI App Store for timeline, you should find that one there. But I liked it because it has buttons specifically for this year, this month, last month, last year, and so forth, as well as the ability to select by week, by month, by quarter, and so forth. There's also a scatter plot. Now, you may wonder why that scatter plot looks like it does. I mean, typically scatter plots have a bunch of tiny dots. And you're looking for trend lines or patterns, right? This particular scatter plot has big dots and there's no discernible pattern there. And that's because it has a very specific purpose that I'll come to in a moment. First, let's take a look at some of what we can do here. Let's say that I'm a housekeeping supervisor. That's the button that's pre-selected here in this chiclet slicer. So what we're looking at is color coding of these rooms. Here's the legend right here. And by the way, they threw a curve at me that took me a couple of minutes to figure out the math. It's not hard math. It just took me a couple of minutes to figure it out. They said, oh, by the way, we want to use the same colors, but we want the meaning of those colors to change based on the time interval. So if I'm looking at a week's worth of data, I want the 6th issue to turn the room from green to yellow. I want the 11th issue the 11th issue to turn the room from yellow to red. But oh, by the way, if I'm looking at a month's worth of data, the threshold is 21 instead of 6 and 41 instead of 11. And same thing if it's more than a month, and we're different thresholds. So that's a DAX measure that does the calculation to normalize everything so that we have one set of colors that the Visio visual color by value logic can make use of. So back to being a housekeeping supervisor. So I'm looking at housekeeping issues. I can zoom in and out here if I want to. That's great. Let's close this window. But let's say I'm looking at the issue list here and I notice that there's an issue here where housekeeper has been sent back to the room. So I'm going to select that and notice that we've got a cluster of rooms in this wing on the left and a cluster of rooms on the right here. Now, I'm a housekeeping supervisor. That's going to raise some questions for me. I'm going to wonder whether it's an issue with the particular housekeeper who's servicing this wing on the left or the wing on the right. Is it the same housekeeper or a different one? I would know that as the supervisor. But let's focus over here on the left. Is the fact that there are 4 rooms that all had to call the housekeeper back, is that a problem with the housekeeper? Is it a maintenance issue that's affecting that wing that we need to take a look at? But if I'm the housekeeping supervisor, I want to look at my staff first. So I'm going to say to myself, what happened last week? Go to the time slicer, look at week 2. Lo and behold, nothing, no issue. This particular issue, and by the way, these slicers are set up to automatically maintain filters across pages. That was something I learned along the way, and that was really convenient. So I've got it set up so that I can, in fact, see that there was not this issue last week. Just for the sake of argument, let's go back another week. Well, we actually had 2 rooms in that same floor, same section of the floor. Again, I'm going to take a look at the housekeeping staff. Was it the same person involved? Are there other engineering issues? But I've got all this data available. I can take a look at this on a monthly basis. Let's look at the month of January or the month of December. So I've got the ability to slice and dice here and do some really useful and interesting things. Let's take a little different view. How about if I'm an engineering manager? So let's turn off housekeeping. Let's go with engineering. A lot fewer issues, which is good because housekeepers, as you would expect, are in and out of rooms all the time. You want to see fewer rooms with any issues at all if you're an engineering manager. But we can see that there are some rooms and we get a sense for what the issues are over here. I can look at those issues by trade. So how many of these issues were completed by a heating, ventilating, air conditioning mechanic, or how many were completed by an electrician? So I can slice that way, or I can look at specific issues. Now, I don't happen to have the one I'm looking for on this floor. What I like is and I'll use this as a surrogate. I'm going to take shower. what I'm looking for that happens not to be in the data for this floor is what I'd really like to have is an issue where there's water leaking from the ceiling. Why? Because that makes this graphical presentation really, really valuable. Because I can see, okay, here are 2 rooms that have this issue on this floor. You're a plumber. What are you going to look for if you see 2 rooms in one section of a building that have water leaking in the ceiling? You're going to look for a horizontal issue. Are there other rooms? You're going to look at time. What about last week? Oh, the same 2 rooms. Oh, no, those rooms were clear last week, so it's only this week. That's good. So this isn't an historical problem. But what's the other thing you're going to do? You're going to look up and you're going to look down. And I can do that so easily here, but let's go to the floor below. Do I have the same rooms lit up on the floor plan for the floor below that I do on this floor? And the answer is no. So that's terrific. If we go back to 2.2, we can see that those 2 rooms this is an isolated problem on this floor. This gives them power that they just didn't have. Would they have figured this out from a set of PDF reports? Maybe. Would they have gotten complaints from guests down below that would have driven them to look on the floor below or the floor above? Probably, eventually. But armed with the data about one set of rooms on this floor, I have an immediate ability to see what's going on around me. And the inferences I can draw are just that much more powerful. Now, I want to come back to this scatter plot, and then I'm almost finished with, except for my brief recap of 1 or 2 interesting data-related issues. The scatter plot has big round numbers because they equipped housekeeping supervisors and engineering managers with a Surface Pro. They were using it for other purposes as well. They had Teams on them, and they were using it for communication of variety of sorts and some other apps. But they wanted to put this into Teams on the same Surface Pro tablets. Now, I can, with my mouse, I can click on a room here, and let's take, let me find a room that has multiple issues. So here's a room, 2214, that has 4 issues in this particular week. Or I can even expand the time frame, and I'll probably bump that count up. So I got 16 issues in this room in this 4-week period. What if I want to drill down and see what's going on with that room? Well, what I'd like to do in a typical Visio visual or typical visual in Power BI is right-click and drill through. Because I've got a room detail page, I built it for this purpose. But the Visio visual at present does not have a drill through capability, which is too bad. And several of us have complained. We'll see what happens. But that's the reason this scatter plot exists. You notice when I selected room 2214 or 2215, we get a dot down there that represents that room. Only reason it's there is so I can, with my mouse, I can right click and drill through. But if I'm a supervisor walking around with a tablet, that blue dot is just about fingertip size. So I can press and hold in order to be able to drill through, the right mouse equivalent. So now I can drill through to the room detail page. Now we see some pie charts and some other ways to slice and dice. This is the first and only page on which we see people's names. Notice curiously, everybody who works for this company is named Smith. This is where we can actually say, okay, Jose, what's up with him? Well, he had 2 issues. His average duration to repair was 11 minutes. Not bad. How about Marie? 13 minutes. Not bad. And so we can poke around and see how individuals are doing, as well as be able to slice and dice in other ways. This is the way we can navigate back to the page from which we came, as well as use that to go to other floors, as you saw me do a moment ago. Once again, hit me with questions or comments, or why didn't I do this, or why didn't I do that? And I'm happy to answer. I've got a couple more thoughts about data and then some resources, and we're done. Not hearing any comments. I don't see.
Since you did the drill through.
Yes.
Did you get them to adopt actually using that so they could, did they leverage that? Because to me, that's so powerful. And I always try to evangelize. This is important for Y-type questions.
Yeah.
But did they get it and adopt it?
I can't tell you how widely that particular feature is used, the press and hold and drill through, because just the way the timing of the contract worked, this particular company is a lot like many major corporations. As a contractor, there's a fixed period of time during which you're allowed to be a contractor, and then you have to go away for a year. Or some period of time. In this case, it was a year. My year has just expired, so I'm actually technically I could be contracted to them again. But just the way the timing worked out, we got just about to this point a little bit further when the contract ended. So I don't actually know how widely that feature was used. The team I was working with thought it was great. They loved the idea that the housekeeping supervisor could tap and hold and drill through to see who's done what in this room. By the way, I didn't.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't say this about Hot Sauce. I said it had lots and lots of data in it. There is a record, an entry made in Hot Sauce for every time a room is touched. There are obvious things that fall in that category, like housekeeper goes in to provide service, housekeeper exits. That's 2 entries in the log or in the database. But it's everything from there to a DoorDash arrives, a driver arrives with food for room 312. That gets logged. A housekeeper in a room notices that there's a light bulb out and calls in and puts in a ticket for engineering. An engineer is there repairing a leak and discovers there's a leak on the floor below and puts in a ticket for that so another plumber can go take care of that. There are literally millions of entries in this database over time for every room in every resort hotel across all of their theme parks. Good comment from Colin. Don't I need to check which rooms were consistently occupied before comparing issue rates? Yes, that was something that we talked about. We don't have usage data here oddly enough, with all the things that are in the hot sauce data, an easy way to extract usage is not there. So we talked about that. We thought, it would be very helpful to add that filter because a room that has 9 issues that is occupied every single day of the month is a different story from a room that has 9 issues that's occupied 3 days here and 2 days later in the same month, and that's it. So very good point. Yeah, in fact, I hadn't read all of your comment. You said exactly what I did. So yeah, very good point. So a couple of quick things about the data. The hot sauce data, as I mentioned, we didn't have access to it directly, but 4 a.m. every day, there was an extract of the data into Snowflake. So my primary data source was hot sauce living inside Snowflake, a daily extract. I looked at different ways, and again, remember, I'm learning Power BI as I go here. I looked at different ways to get that data into multiple reports, and I was going to have at least a dozen different hotels, a dozen different reports, one for each hotel. So I looked at the obvious default, which is you take the data that you have available and you stuff it inside report 1 and report 2 and report 3. So every report has its own copy of the data. That just seemed like a bad idea right from the start. Certainly it has some advantages, principally simplicity, but it meant that every time the data was updated, we had to update all of the 12, 15, however many different reports there were. So I looked at direct mode. I said, okay, how about if we have one data source and we use direct mode? But that means that every time there's a slice or dice or any interaction with the data, we're back and forth to the data source, and that seemed less likely to be a good idea because of the potential transaction volume. So then I discovered this ability to build a Power BI report whose primary or sole function is to have data living inside it. So basically the Power BI report becomes the data source. So the Snowflake data is moved into one report that is then becomes the shared data source for all of the other reports. Whenever the data is updated in the shared data report, the reports 1 through 12 just inherit that change data automatically because they all are sharing the same data source. So this is what we ended up doing, and it seems to be a pretty effective solution to the dilemma of the quantity of data, the number of potential transactions, and managing the daily updates. There is another solution I've only learned about in the last 30 days, and it's from your speaker next month, from Reza, who posted this article in the middle of April. The fact that you can apparently mirror Snowflake data in Power BI, and he claims right here supercharged analytics without extra costs. So if I get back involved with this case study, I will be taking a look at this for sure, because it sounds like we mirror the whole Snowflake data set and right there inside of Power BI, and there really isn't any additional cost the way he describes it. So when you get the PDF of my slides, this image has a link, or just go to radicad.com and look at the resources section and search for Snowflake, and you'll find this article. All right, let's wrap up. I mentioned I've got these couple of resource slides here. These are some links to information directly from the Visio team at Microsoft, as well as the answers section, or the Visio section of the answers forums. They're there available. And I hang out at Answers and answer a lot of Visio questions there, so feel free to drop in if you have questions. This aka.ms link is the one I had on a slide right at the very beginning. That is a set of Microsoft created Power BI with Visio visual demos. There is a good resource article that is at the bit.ly link there. That is a great description and a lot of technical details about using the Visio visual in Power BI. One of the other Visio MVPs is a gentleman in the UK named David Parker, and he was of the 6 of us Visio MVPs, he was the first one to jump in to explore the Visio visual in Power BI, jumped in with both feet, has created some stunning examples. This particular one that says PBI org chart floor chart is a PBI report that does indeed have both a Visio floor plan and a Visio org chart in it, and a bunch of slicers around it. So you can do things like say, show me where the marketing department sits. Now, of course, this was created back in the day when the marketing department tended to sit in the office, but you get the idea. So both diagrams filter, and we can look at the org chart portion that has the marketing department. We can look at the floor plan portion, or I can click on a room in the floor plan, as you saw me do in my theme park or resort hotel example. Click on a room in the floor plan and see who sits there. Or I can click on a section of the organization chart and see where that person is in the floor plan. Great example. I encourage you to take a look at it. I mentioned the Adobe Color Accessibility page. This is my bit.ly link to that page. I encourage you to use it, or there are other similar resources available to let you build a set of colors that truly can be used by a larger percentage of the population. Some of my resources, including LinkedIn Learning courses. I'm actually in the midst, as we speak, of updating the Working with Data course and the Visio Tips and Tricks course. Those I will turn over to LinkedIn Learning in June, and they should be available. The updated versions should be available in August. My books are available. I've got my note here is wrong. There's actually a 30% discount at Microsoft Press if you use the coupon code Visio, just the word Visio, and it's actually a 30% discount. This is where I live. You can find me on X, if you will, at VisProcess, my email address. Feel free to get in touch with me. My LinkedIn QR code was at the very beginning, but you can find me here at this address, linkedin.com, or any of these website links as well. Slides. If you want to get the PDF copy of my slides, use this QR code or go to this bit.ly link. And with that, Mark, I'm done. That was a bit more than an hour, but I hope it was interesting, and I certainly appreciate the questions I got, and I'm happy to hang around now and answer more questions if there are any.